My sons treated my home as their future inheritance, a gold mine to exploit. They saw an aging, vulnerable mother, ripe for manipulation. But beneath my quiet exterior, a storm was brewing. They meticulously plotted, unaware I was listening, learning, and preparing a final, shocking surprise that would leave their carefully laid plans and their lives in absolute tatters. For the first 3 years after my husband, David, passed, the silence in our house was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It was a home we had built not just with wood and nails, but with 30 years of laughter, arguments, and shared dreams. Every floorboard held an echo of his footsteps, every room a ghost of his presence. At 66, a retired community librarian, I found myself the sole custodian of this sprawling 2-story memory box, fully paid off and nestled in the quiet suburban lane where we'd raised our 2 sons. Those sons, Kyle and Eric, had stepped up, or so it seemed. They devised what they called the Janine schedule. Kyle, my eldest at 42, and a slick real estate agent with a smile that could sell a swamp as a waterfront property, took Tuesdays. Eric, 38, who drifted between gig economy jobs with a perpetually worried look, took Thursdays. They'd bring groceries, take out the heavy trash bins, and ask a series of rote questions about my health and the house. On the surface, it was the picture of filial devotion, the kind of thing my friends would coo over. "You're so lucky to have such caring boys, Janine." I would smile and nod, but a strange, hollow feeling always followed their visits. Their care felt programmatic. Kyle's conversations were efficient, checklists disguised as chats. "Mom, you're doing great. House is holding up well, good bones." He'd say it while his eyes scanned the crown molding, not my face. Eric was quieter, more hesitant, but his gaze would drift to the sturdy oak banister or the wide, sunlit living room, a flicker of something I couldn't name in his eyes. It felt less like a visit and more like an inspection. I told myself I was being ungrateful. They were busy men with their own lives, after all. This structured support was their way of loving me, a practical solution for modern times. I was the one who was stuck in the past, accustomed to David's all-encompassing, effortless affection. I spent my days tending to the rose garden in the backyard, the one David had planted for me on our 10th anniversary. Out there, with my hands in the soil, surrounded by the scent of blossoms he had chosen, the love felt real. Inside, after my son's brief, sterile visits, the silence would rush back in, colder and more profound than before. It was a carefully constructed piece, and I was beginning to feel like its prisoner. The caring arrangement had been in place for nearly 2 years when the first dissonant notes began to play, subtle at first, like a single key out of tune in a familiar song. I started noticing small, odd discrepancies. The guest bathroom upstairs, which I rarely entered, seemed to run out of soap and shampoo at an alarming rate. The crisp, folded guest towels I kept in the linen closet were sometimes slightly disheveled, as if used and hastily put back. It was a feeling, a slight disruption in the domestic order I had maintained for decades. Then came the sounds. On a Monday, a day neither of my sons was scheduled to visit, I was in the kitchen listening to the radio when I heard a faint creak from the floorboards directly above, in the spare bedroom. It was a brief, furtive sound, but unmistakable. When I called Eric later that evening to ask if he had stopped by, his voice was a little too quick, a little too smooth. "Oh, yeah, Mom. I was nearby and remembered you needed that heavy-duty plant food. Just dropped it in the garage. Didn't want to bother you." There was no plant food in the garage. A few weeks later, it was Kyle. I was coming up the driveway from my afternoon walk when I saw a strange car, a nondescript sedan, pulling away from our curb. Kyle's SUV was parked in its usual spot. When I entered, he was wiping down the kitchen counter, looking flustered. "Just a colleague," he said, anticipating my question. "Needed to sign some papers urgently. We didn't want to interrupt your walk." The excuses were always plausible, always designed to make me feel like they were being considerate. But their consideration began to feel like containment. They started gently discouraging me from going upstairs. "Mom, those stairs are a killer on your knees," Kyle would say, his tone dripping with concern. "Let us handle the cleaning up there. We'll make sure everything's dusted and tidy for you." They were framing my home, my own 2-story house, as a hazard to my health, subtly corralling me onto the ground floor. My world was shrinking, one helpful suggestion at a time, and I was being made to feel grateful for it. The final, fragile thread of my self-deception snapped on a Thursday afternoon in late September. It was Eric's day, but he had called that morning, his voice thick with what I now recognized as feigned illness, to say he couldn't make it. I'd felt a familiar pang of disappointment, followed by a wave of guilt for my own selfishness. To shake it off, I decided to tackle the overgrown climbing roses on the trellis just outside the kitchen window. The sun was warm on my back, a gentle, benevolent heat, and the rhythmic snip-snip of my shears against the woody stems was a soothing balm. It was peaceful. It was normal. That's when I heard voices from inside. The kitchen window, which I'd left cracked open to catch a breeze, acted like a perfect conduit. It was Kyle and Eric. My first thought was a surge of foolish, maternal relief. Eric must be feeling better after all. He'd come over with his brother. I was about to wipe my earthy hands on my apron and call out to them when the words froze me in place, my shears hovering over a wilting, rust-colored rosebud. "Don't worry, the tech intern is out by next Tuesday, and I've already got his payment," Kyle was saying, his voice stripped of all its usual filial warmth. It was the crisp, transactional tone of the real estate agent I knew he was, but had never heard directed at our family life. "The new couple from San Diego is confirmed for the following week. Mom is completely oblivious. She actually thinks we're here to check on her." A dry, humorless laugh followed, a sound so alien in my home that it felt like a trespass. My mind struggled to process the words. Intern? Payment? It was like listening to a foreign language. Eric's voice, lower and laced with its familiar anxiety, chimed in. "Are you sure this is a good idea, Kyle? She almost caught me last week. I told her I was checking a pipe, but she had this look." "Relax," Kyle cut him off, his voice sharp with impatience. "Her look is just her being old. She's too trusting. It's our biggest advantage. Look, we just have to keep this up for a few more years. Once she's in a nursing home or, you know. The two words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. They didn't need to say the other word. Dies. The unspoken truth echoed in the sudden, roaring silence in my ears. The shears fell from my hand, landing soundlessly on the soft grass. My blood ran cold, a glacial tide washing away 30 years of warmth. Kyle continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more chilling. "This place will be ours. It's a gold mine. We sell it, split the cash, and walk away with at least $1 million each. Just be patient. Think of it as an investment. An investment. This house, where I'd brought them both home from the hospital, where David and I had marked their heights on a doorframe, where we'd celebrated every birthday and nursed every fever, was an investment. I leaned against the warm brick of the house, my own house, feeling like a stranger hiding in the shadows. The scent of the roses, David's roses, suddenly seemed cloying and funereal. I wasn't their mother. I was a line item in their portfolio. I was a temporary occupant, a ghost haunting their future profits, and my only value was in the date of my eventual vacancy. The grief was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that knocked all the air out of my lungs and replaced it with shards of ice. For a long moment, I remained perfectly still, hidden by the leafy curtain of the climbing roses. My first instinct was to storm into the kitchen, to confront them, to scream until my throat was raw. I wanted to see the shock on their faces, to make them witness the devastation they had wrought. But as the initial tidal wave of pain receded, it left behind a chilling, crystalline clarity. What would that accomplish? They would deny it. They would gaslight me, call me confused, emotional, perhaps even suggest I was losing my mind. They would apologize with empty words while their eyes calculated a new, more careful strategy. No, a scene would give them power. Silence was my shield. I retreated from the window, moving with a stealth I didn't know I possessed, and slipped back into the quiet of my bedroom. The floral wallpaper suddenly seemed to mock me with its cheerful pattern. I sat on the edge of my bed, my body trembling not with weakness, but with a nascent, unfamiliar rage. The tears I expected didn't come. Instead, my mind began to work with a cold, methodical precision I hadn't felt since my days managing the library's annual budget. They saw my house as a business. Fine. I would start acting like a CEO. My first call was to Martha, my friend of 40 years. A retired court clerk, Martha possessed a pragmatism that was as sharp and unyielding as a judge's gavel. I met her for coffee the next morning at a small cafe downtown, far from the prying eyes of our neighborhood. As I laid out the story, her expression shifted from sympathetic concern to righteous fury. "The little vultures," she hissed, her hand covering mine on the table. "Janine, you cannot let them get away with this. Your kindness is not a weakness they get to exploit." Martha's validation was the spark I needed. She wasn't just a friend. She was my first witness, confirming that what I felt was not an overreaction, but a justified response to a profound betrayal. She laid out a plan with the efficiency of a legal brief. First, you need undeniable proof, not just what you overheard, but something concrete. Second, you need a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a shark. Following her advice felt like taking my first breath of clean air after years in a stuffy room. That afternoon, I went online and ordered a micro-recorder, a tiny, innocuous device disguised as a plug-in air freshener. It was a small act of subterfuge that felt both deeply foreign and incredibly empowering. My next step was finding a lawyer. Martha recommended a woman named Miss Albright, known for her iron will and expertise in estate planning. During our consultation, Miss Albright listened without interruption, her gaze sharp and intelligent. When I finished, she didn't offer condolences. She offered solutions. She explained the power of an irrevocable living trust, a legal fortress that, once established, would place my assets entirely under my control and beyond the reach of any future claims from my sons. The plan was no longer just a reaction, it was becoming a strategy. I was no longer just a victim, I was a tactician. For the next 4 weeks, I lived a double life. On the surface, I was the same quiet, slightly .com mother my sons expected. I smiled during their visits, asked about their lives, and pretended to be grateful for their help. But beneath that placid exterior, a silent, meticulous operation was underway. The air freshener was plugged into an outlet in the upstairs hallway, a silent sentinel capturing every whispered conversation, every hushed phone call. The evidence it gathered was more damning than I could have imagined. I would listen to the recordings at night, my headphones on, the house dark and still. I heard them discussing renters by name, complaining about a tenant who left a mess, and strategizing how to hide the extra utility costs from me. I heard Kyle coaching Eric on what to say if I ever got suspicious. The worst was a conversation they had one Tuesday, believing I was at my book club. They were laughing about how I still used a flip phone and wouldn't know how to check a Wi-Fi history. Laughing about how my frugality meant more money would be left for them. "She's so stuck in the past," Kyle had chuckled. "It's perfect. The older she gets, the easier this is." Each recording was a small, sharp cut, but instead of bleeding me dry, it hardened my resolve. The pain was morphing into fuel. With every piece of evidence, I felt my power growing. I met with Miss Albright again, the audio files saved on a small USB drive. She listened to a few key excerpts, her expression grim. "This is more than enough, Janine," she said, her voice firm. "This is coercion and elder exploitation. We have them." Together, we finalized the documents for the irrevocable trust. The legal language was dense, but the core message was simple and beautiful: absolute control. The time had come to bring down the curtain. I called Kyle and Eric and invited them for dinner the following Sunday. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I said, injecting a note of weary vulnerability into my voice. "About the future, the house, all of it. I think it's time we had a proper talk." The bait was taken instantly. Their enthusiastic agreement was almost comical. They arrived that Sunday bearing a bottle of expensive wine and wearing their most attentive, caring expressions. They saw the finish line. They thought this was it, the conversation where I'd finally agree to move into a managed care facility and hand over the keys. They sat at the dining table, the same table where they'd celebrated countless birthdays, and spoke of their deep concern for my well-being, their words a symphony of disingenuous love. "Mom, we just want what's best for you," Kyle said, placing his hand over mine. "This big house, it's a lot for you to manage." We'll help you find a lovely place, Eric added softly. Smaller, more manageable, safer. I let them talk, let them spin their web of deceit one last time. I watched their faces, the feigned sincerity, the poorly concealed greed in their eyes. When they had finally finished, I took a slow sip of water. You're right, I said, my voice calm and even. We do need to talk about what's best. And I've been doing some recording of my own. I reached into my apron pocket, pulled out the small digital recorder, and pressed play. The sound of Kyle's voice filled the stunned silence of the room. Mom is completely oblivious. Think of it as an investment. Their faces went through a rapid, ugly transformation. The counterfeit warmth drained away, replaced by a ghastly white shock, then a creeping, blotchy red of pure panic. I let the recording play for a full minute before pressing stop. First, I said, my voice as cold and hard as polished steel. Regarding the illegal boarding house you've been running out of my home, a full complaint, along with audio evidence and records of suspicious utility spikes, has been filed with the town's zoning board and tax office. Kyle opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Second, I continued, sliding a thick folder across the polished wood of the table towards them. This is a copy of my new, legally binding and irrevocable living trust. I paused, letting the words sink in. I've met with my financial advisor and my lawyer. This house, my savings, my investments, everything has been placed within it. The sole beneficiary upon my death will be the State Animal Protection League. I leaned forward slightly. I've decided to leave it all to the dogs. Literally. The silence that followed my announcement was absolute. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving a vacuum where their hopes and schemes had once been. Kyle's face was a mask of disbelief, his jaw slack. Eric simply stared at the folder on the table as if it were a venomous snake. Then, the shockwave hit. Kyle was the first to break, his carefully constructed composure shattering into a million pieces. You can't do that, he sputtered, his voice cracking. We're your sons. This is our birthright. A birthright is earned through love and respect, not deceit, I replied, my voice unwavering. The fear I thought I would feel in this moment was absent, replaced by a profound, unshakable calm. Eric finally found his voice, a pathetic, pleading whine. Mom, please, it wasn't like that. We were just trying to help with expenses. We were going to tell you. The lie was so flimsy, so insulting, that a small, bitter laugh escaped my lips. Help with expenses? By turning my home into a secret hotel and laughing about my ignorance? By waiting for me to die so you could cash in on your investment? No, the time for lies is over. The scene devolved quickly. Kyle's panic morphed into a terrifying rage. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He accused me of being senile, of being manipulated by my lawyer. He called me cruel, unnatural, a monster who would turn her back on her own flesh and blood. Eric, meanwhile, dissolved into tears, babbling about how sorry he was, how much he loved me, how we could fix this. It was a grotesque two-act play of aggression and pity, and for the first time I saw it for the pathetic performance it was. I remained seated, the queen in her castle, watching the storm break around me. When they finally paused, breathless and spent, I looked at them not with anger, but with a deep, sorrowful finality. When I needed a family, you gave me a business plan. This, I gestured to the folder, is my response. My life, my home, and my dignity are no longer negotiable assets in your portfolio. They are mine. I stood up. Now I want you to leave my house. They left, not with the confident stride of owners in waiting, but with the shambling gait of defeated trespassers. Within a week, the news had ripped through our small town's gossip mill. The story had everything: family drama, secret schemes, and a shocking twist. Kyle, the slick real estate agent, was now known as the man who tried to swindle his own mother and got disinherited. His professional reputation was left in tatters. Eric, branded as his brother's weak-willed accomplice, found the community's doors quietly closing on him. They had lost their inheritance, but more than that, they had lost their standing, their respect, their place. They were utterly ruined, not by my anger, but by their own greed. 6 months later, the silence in my house has returned, but it is a different kind of silence. It's not the hollow, lonely echo of loss. It's the rich, peaceful quiet of solitude. It's the sound of freedom. The upstairs guest rooms, once the scene of my son's secret enterprise, have been reclaimed. One is now my painting studio, smelling of turpentine and linseed oil, its walls covered with my canvases of vibrant, abstract landscapes. The other is a dedicated guest room once more, but its occupants are now of the four-legged variety. As a lead volunteer for the State Animal Protection League, I've become a foster mom for dogs recovering from surgery or awaiting their forever homes. This week, my companion is a gentle, three-legged Labrador named Buster. He follows me from room to room, his tail thumping a steady, happy rhythm against the floorboards. Right now, he's sleeping at my feet, snoring softly as the afternoon sun streams through the living room window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I sit in my favorite armchair, a cup of Earl Grey steaming in my hands, and look around my home. It is finally, completely mine again. My friend Martha and I are planning a trip to Italy next spring, a trip I'd always wanted to take with David but never did. There is so much world left to see. I lost 2 sons that day, but what I truly lost was an illusion. In its place, I found something infinitely more valuable, myself. I found my strength, my boundaries, and my worth. I traded a toxic legacy for a future filled with wagging tails, genuine friendships, and the profound, unshakable peace of a life lived on my own terms. I took a deep breath, the air clean and light, and smiled. I had won. Thank you for listening to my story. It's not always easy to stand up for yourself, especially against your own family, but your peace and dignity are worth the fight. If you have a story of your own, I hope you find the strength to tell it. You deserve to be heard.